Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome to today's program Bill Alrich, who is Customer Solutions Representative at Elemica. And today we're going to talk about the value of supply chain quality management in the aerospace and defense industry. Now, quality is one of those pillars of supply chain management, along with cost, service, and risk. And managing quality across, the extended supply chain is critically important, especially in aerospace and defense, but it's been a challenge, for many companies. So what have been some of the obstacles? How is technology helping companies overcome those obstacles and streamline and automate their quality management processes? And, what is the value proposition of supply chain quality management? Well, those are some of the key questions we're going to address in today's episode. And it's great to have Bill in the program to share his insights and perspective on this topic. So Bill, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Adrian. Great to talk to you and to the greater supply chain audience out there, and hopefully we'll have some things worthwhile for them to listen to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, this is one of those topics that I think supply chain quality management that is starting to get a little bit more attention, rightly so, than it has in the past. So I think helping to educate the market on why this is important is one of our objectives here. So Bill, we've had some of your colleagues on at Elemica on the program before. This is your first time. So like I always like to do whenever we bring in a new guest, I'm always curious how people get involved with this crazy industry that we're in. And so why don't you tell us briefly a little bit about your career path, how and why you got involved with supply chain logistics, and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Elemica?
Sure. Been in the software and cloud services business my entire career, and the majority of that has been in the supply chain space. I spent 10 or so years with the transportation management and logistics vendors, selling those solutions and working with those companies. And then I joined a small company here in Chicago that had developed a solution specifically for supply chain quality that has now been acquired, of course, by Elemica and is now called Elemica Quality. So I tell people that I used to care about how the box got from point A to point B. Now I care about what's in the box. But as you just said, quality and logistics are two critical pieces of an effective supply chain strategy, and they really are tightly interconnected. So that's coming in handy for me as a customer solutions representative here. I'm supporting the Elemica sales force in North America, bringing these pieces together for their clients.
That's great background. And yeah, you're right. I think when you look at, like I said in my opening comments, quality is really one of those pillars, along with cost, service, and risk. And the three, the four are really interrelated and really depend on each other. I think, rightly so, a lot of companies focus a lot on cost and service, and that's where a lot of discussions take place. But obviously, if you have issues with quality, that's going to impact cost, that's going to impact service as well. That it's going to impact risk. And also all these things are really, interrelated. And I think what we're seeing now is that, as companies are trying to, move up the maturity curve when it comes to really truly managing their end-to-end supply chain, they're starting to pay more attention to, the quality, dimension of all this. So why don't we start there? Why is supply chain quality management particularly important for companies today, especially in the aerospace and defense industry?
Yeah, well, we'll be talking about that out in Phoenix next week at the Aerospace and Defense conference that's happening out there. So this is something that's been at the top of our mind as well. But there's a couple things that make that industry different from others. And one is that it's a highly regulated environment. It's one where failures generate headlines around the world, and death and injury are very possible consequences of not doing things right from a design and a manufacturing perspective. In addition, you have industry standards like AS 9100 and AS 13004 that are widely accepted and expected by their customers, the air carriers and defense departments around the world. These are things that they expect their suppliers to be following and adhering to. But of course, at the same time, like every other industry, they're under pressure to lower costs and to innovate faster, to come out with the next version of the big thing sooner. And to do that, many of them, as again, across the board, have decided to rely on a more extended, diverse supply chain than they had in the past. The days when a car was manufactured from parts that came from a 50-mile radius are long gone. And now you have suppliers all over the world that are really the biggest risk factor for a lot of manufacturers. In this space, in this industry, 70% of the value of their finished products comes from external sources. Unlike some, in the food business where, it may be a few commodities that are locally sourced that are getting processed. In this industry, there's a lot of diversity. You see it in things like the Boeing Dreamliner. Remember that when that came out, it was not quite a disaster, but it was a rocky launch due to the fact that they had outsourced so much of the design and the manufacturing in order to get it done faster, in order to take advantage of cost. And now it's a solid product. It's well accepted in the industry. It's being heavily used by the airlines, but it had difficulties because of that. At the other end of the extreme, again, Boeing is the poster child right now, the 737 MAX situation. That's a reflection of the extended life cycle of these products. It's unusual for you to get in a car that's more than 10 or 15 years old, but it's not unusual to get on a plane that's 30 years old and fly. And so these products need to be refreshed and updated. And when you do that, having access to the correct documentation, the correct data, might allow you to avoid the problems that Boeing has had with their software updates that cause these disasters. So there's a lot of things that make it supply chain quality a more critical concern for manufacturers in aerospace and defense, and perhaps in other industries.
No, a lot of great points there. Certainly as this industry has become much more outsourced, if you will, much more fragmented, much more global. The need to synchronize and coordinate between so many different external parties. And then when you think about that, then there's the data that has to flow between the different parties, the documents perhaps that need to flow between the different parties. Every party's trying to get more digital, if you will, or move up the digital transformation curve. And like you said, unfortunately, you see the headlines where what happens when quality falls by the wayside, or when things, kind of slip. If from a safety, standpoint, particularly in aerospace, in defense is very critical. I remember when I worked at Motorola many years ago, we supported the automotive industry, and part of our product that we supported was the airbag circuitry. So obviously there was another safety, component of an automobile. If that airbag failed to deploy in an accident, that could mean the difference between someone being injured versus being killed, or versus, walking away, safely. So, we used to have printed in our boxes, quality means the world to us, back then. I still remember that. So yeah.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
In that context, of course, you have Takeda, who recently, I think, went out of business because of, airbags that were deploying improperly, and people were getting injured because of that. So getting it to happen at the right time is one thing. Making sure it doesn't happen at the wrong time is another set of considerations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think it's clear, particularly if you pick up the newspaper these days and you're reading the stories about Boeing. Unfortunately, I think it kind of brings the message home how quality is coming to the forefront, and it needs to be in the forefront in this industry. So let's talk now. How have companies in the aerospace and defense industries traditionally managed supply chain quality management? What issues or challenges have they faced?
Well, one of the experts that I follow in this space said that aerospace companies use spreadsheets for about 85% of their quality data, which is probably a higher percentage than some other industries. And he said, that's like using a screwdriver as a crowbar. It'll work in the short term, but it's not a good long-term strategy. And it does put them behind other industries in this space because of the regulation, because of the low volume but high value of their products, and that long life cycle that we were talking about. So for all those reasons, quality systems that have been designed and implemented for mass production environments, stamping out the cookies or the canned soup or the hats or whatever, a million at a time, don't fit necessarily for this industry, and they have to have the ability to customize and do things in a more unique way than some of the other industries out there. Another big issue is the security concerns. Obviously, if someone steals your recipe for tomato soup, that could be bad from a competitive point of view. But if somebody gets the blueprints for the new missile or the new plane, that can have some serious implications. So that makes it difficult for that supplier collaboration we talked about earlier to take place, particularly at the design stage when things are being planned and ideas are being developed and discarded as it goes along. You want to be able to, or you need to be able to collaborate closely with your suppliers there. But if you don't have a highly secure method for doing that, and email is not a highly secure method, then you're going to be potentially running into problems. And so a lot of these companies have gone the route of trying to build portals that their suppliers can use to access the documents and the things that they need. But that gets them into the software business, and building a plane is very different than building and maintaining software, as Boeing has found out. So how do they deal with that connectivity issue? They've got to keep their suppliers connected. They've got to be able to connect new suppliers quickly. And of course, those suppliers in the industry in general expect ever increasing amount of capability and functionality in those portals, which are tough to maintain. So it's a tough combination for them, and that's why so many manual processes like the spreadsheets and first article inspections, PPAPs, APQP standards, certificates of compliance tend to be handled manually in this space, and that makes it very difficult for them to do that kind of effective collaboration that other industries are already well into from a supply chain point of view.
You know, it never ceases to amaze me, you know, how Excel continues to be probably the most deployed supply chain, you know, technology, you know, out there.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And, you know, and just, you know, like you said, I mean, you know, sending an email with a bunch of people on the CC list and attaching an Excel spreadsheet is not necessarily the most efficient and effective way to collaborate and exchange information. And certainly at the other end, someone's going to have to take that data that's in the spreadsheet and then type it into some kind of computer system. So that introduces, you know, the opportunity for errors or data quality issues. It's a lot of wasted labor and time, to, you know, to do that. So just a cascade of issues, you know, when you're thinking about, you know, the manual, you know, processes and all the friction in the system, if you will. And then when you talk about the portals, I mean, you've got a situation, and then you've got to support, you know, tens, if not hundreds of portals that some supplier may have to go to kind of interact, and that becomes untenable as well. So yeah, I think a lot of issues there. I think I've always been, you know, when you look at this industry, like other industries that are, you know, global, that have many different trading partners. I mean, I've always been a big proponent of supply chain operating networks or business networks. I mean, a lot of different terminology, you know, for the supplier networks, because that really creates that ecosystem and allows everybody to be on that common platform, if you will, to be able to, you know, share data, share information, and collaborate more efficiently. Which kind of brings me to my next question. I mean, how is technology evolving now to help companies in the industry to streamline and automate, you know, the quality process? I mean, what capabilities are most important?
Well, there's a couple key things that companies have to think about, particularly in aerospace, but in general. You know, and the first is that there are a lot of tools out there, spreadsheets being one of them, and many other quality systems. Many of the ERP vendors have quality modules as part of their package, or they've acquired a quality system and they have been, you know, incorporated that to some degree. So the right tools are out there, and the first step is to evaluate your needs and your requirements. As I said, what suits a mass production environment may not suit a discrete manufacturing environment like aerospace. It may be quite different than what the process industries need to have for their streams of material. And then that will allow you to eliminate a lot of the human effort, the human uncertainty and error that gets introduced from people trying to handle all this data manually. And the second piece is having a robust network either your own or an industry network that is available to allow you to connect with your suppliers and avoid the cost of building one-off integrations and having to do all of the ongoing maintenance and updating of a portal that you're trying to manage yourself. Once that's in place, then you have the ability now to start doing instant notifications of acceptance or rejection of shipments, of material quality issues, of nonconformances and corrective actions, and you start to get your suppliers engaged to be able to respond effectively, and their workload can go down significantly as well. And so that gives you a steady stream of real data that people can start to work with and use for their own evaluation and more sophisticated kind of analytics, rather than just, did the shipment arrive on time? Did the shipment arrive on time? Was the material within specification? What are the trends on these particular characteristics that are critical for our product? We had one classic example where a company was receiving a raw material in pellet form, and the chemical composition of the pellets was fine, but the hardness of the pellets varied because you had different people running the machinery. And if the pellets were too hard, even though they were technically still within spec, you would get bad things happening for your own production operations. And they could literally have millions of dollars in lost production as a result of it. So it's those kinds of things that you need to get a better handle on, and using things like statistical process controls and ship to control standards gives you a better way to maintain that information once you have that consistent stream of data available to you. And then you can use that for more effective scorecarding. Again, looking at suppliers and not just saying, well, did they get it to us on time? And was it a full order? And was it a complete order? You can all start asking yourself, are they up to date on all their certifications? Are they responsive to corrective action requests? How well do they respond? Those types of things start to be incorporated into scorecards that allow procurement and management to make decisions more effectively, versus having 3 or 4 different systems that they have to refer to or people they have to talk to get that kind of full answer.
Yeah, and a lot of great points there. And I think, when you think about, the multiple tiers of companies that are involved in this supply chain, really to ultimately achieve the full benefits of everything you just talked about, you got to bring, these multiple tiers of suppliers and trading partners. You got to get their buy-in and their participation in all this. I mean, how do you ultimately get these multiple tiers of suppliers and other external parties, to participate in this digital transformation?
Well, that's the heart of it. And you really hit the nail on the head there, because Elemica quality has been in use for a couple decades now. And we don't have a lot of failures to talk about, but we do have a few. And the number one cause of failure over and above anything else is lack of supplier acceptance and participation. That's it. And so that's the biggest hurdle that companies have to be prepared for, and they have to be thinking about well before they issue the purchase order to the software company or whatever they're going to do. So there's a couple ways to avoid that hurdle. And the first off is to get procurement involved along with quality. So it can't just be a quality initiative. It has to have real buy-in and support from the buyers themselves, because they're the ones who own the supplier relationships. They know how to communicate with those folks. They're the ones that, of course, are issuing the POs, so that's who the suppliers are going to be attentive to. But more importantly, the procurement group understands the suppliers and knows which ones are the most in need of extra handholding, extra attention, which ingredients or components are of highest risk or criticality, and therefore you want to pay more attention to them. At the same time, the 80-20 rule applies here, which it applies everywhere, right? 80% of your materials come from 20% of your suppliers in most cases. So, of course, you want to focus on those 20%, but you also have to have a plan in place to get the 80% on board. And you have to have a way to do that that doesn't require expensive integrations and complex 6-month projects to get it all up and running. because that long tail of suppliers really has to be addressed effectively, or you're not going to get 100% participation. And that was my wife walking by there, in case you were wondering. The the second piece there would be breaking the project down into chunks that suppliers can absorb easily. So once they get introduced to the portal or the platform or whatever you want to call it, and they're doing some basic things and they know how to navigate and they feel good with it, then you can add more complex things. Instead of just fill out this form and scan it and email it back to us, you upload it into the portal, and now we can do a real-time evaluation. We can give you a response. Now we're going to do a more complex interactive questionnaire type of thing. That may be an audit form, it may be something else. It requires a little more effort on their part, but it's actually saving them a huge amount of time compared to trying to fill the thing out manually and have to go through all that. So you add increasing levels of functionality as the suppliers become comfortable with the platform. And that's really where you get some of these long-term benefits that aren't initially available. And then the third piece, along with the procurement involvement and breaking it into chunks, the third key thing would be having a clear set of well-documented benefits for the suppliers. A lot of companies are very good at mapping out the ROI and saying, well, if we have 100% participation from our suppliers, we're going to save $3 million a year. Okay, what are the suppliers going to get out of it? Hopefully they'll get more purchase orders. That's what they're hoping for. But they also have to be able to recognize some benefits for themselves. We're reducing the amount of manual entry that they're doing. We're reducing the chance, we're eliminating the chance that a shipment's going to get rejected because it doesn't meet the quality criteria, because that was validated before it ever left the dock. So guess what? You don't have to worry about getting that phone call on Friday afternoon saying we need an overnight shipment to replace the bad crap you sent us. There's a whole bunch of things like that. And again, the procurement group are the ones who have to sell it to the suppliers. You can't have somebody from quality they've never talked to calling them up and saying, yeah, we want you to do all this extra work. And by the way, it might be beneficial to you at some point. So those are really the three things that I would say people have to focus on in planning this out.
Great words of advice there. And, I think that that last point in terms of, what's in it for we, right? So it's really, a lot of times it's like, yeah, what's in it for me, right? It's kind of that internal perspective in terms of what's the value proposition, what are we going to gain? But, right, to get that buy-in, you got to really position it in terms of here's how we're going to mutually, benefit and, get your suppliers to think from a we perspective and really think about the mutual benefits that that they're going to extend across the supply chain in terms of, again, quality, cost, service, and risk standpoint. So I think positioning it that way, makes a lot of sense. I think partnering with procurement makes a lot of sense, too, because like you said, they own they own the relationship as well. So this really has to be a collaborative process, not only internally between the different functional groups, but also externally as well in terms of getting the suppliers and other external parties involved as part of the positioning that value proposition.
And the benefits and the incentives vary on a case-by-case basis, saying this is going to apply to all of our suppliers and they're all going to see a fantastic reduction in manual effort may or may not apply. Somebody in Thailand or Malaysia or China may have a different set of criteria as to what's really beneficial than somebody in North Dakota or Illinois for that matter. One of the things we see all the time is once that COA data becomes automated and digitized and it's flowing in, then we can do more sophisticated trending and analysis and reporting back to the suppliers and saying to them, hey, the grain hardness, the hardness of the pellets is increasing for some reason, from this factory. Maybe there's a change there that you need to look at, and you can avoid that. You can avoid problems that could affect your other customers as well. Or we're doing our own testing internally here. We do skip lot testing, so we're only doing every 5th shipment or 10th shipment or whatever because we trust you. But we're seeing a little bit of a variation between what our test results are and what your test results are. Maybe you need to recalibrate the equipment in the lab in Alabama or North Dakota or wherever. So those kinds of things become an advantage for the suppliers, and of course, they become an advantage for the customer, the manufacturer as well.
Yeah, great insight there. And I think part of it is, I think you touched upon it, is, the data analytics, the BI and data analytics that's now possible.
Right.
When you have this data and information in this type of a platform that you can apply, and the benefits, right, the insights that you get not only are beneficial to you, but can be shared, as appropriate, with the suppliers and trading partners to, be proactive in terms of avoiding issues that, it might be within tolerance right now, but if it's trending in the wrong direction, you want to
Right.
be able to identify that and, address it before it truly becomes a problem. Well, Bill, we're running short on time here, so I'm just going to go right to my last question. And it kind of gets back to kind of that value proposition, right? Because before you can try to sell it externally, sometimes you have to sell it internally, first. So if I'm meeting with the CEO and CFO of an aerospace or a defense company, I mean, what's my business case to them for investing in supply chain quality, management? I mean, what are the key benefits that they should expect?
Well, this is great because it gives me a chance to practice on my pitch for next week in Arizona. So the fact is they're already investing in it, whether they know it or not. And that's one of the issues with quality, is that it doesn't show up on the reports in the same way that inventory shows up as a cost factor or other things that management tends to focus on. If you're receiving materials and you are spending a lot of time on the dock, evaluating the COAs, reviewing the quality characteristics, you can eliminate 70 to 80% of that manual effort. If you are doing your internal lab tests because you don't trust your suppliers, which is not uncommon in any industry, you can use skip lot testing. Once you start having consistent data from them, you can look at it and say, are these guys really, our tests match their test results? We don't have to test every single batch, or we can do sampling and selective sampling versus trying to test everything. And you can reduce your lab costs significantly. Of course, inventory, big factor in everybody's calculations. And if you aren't worried about getting a bad batch and having production issues associated with that, you don't have to carry as much safety stock anymore. Or you can manage it on a regional basis versus an individual plant and manage the inventory more effectively there. And finally, by getting better overall quality, and particularly supply chain quality, you are reducing risks and vulnerabilities that increase your insurance and recovery costs. When you don't have the likelihood that a supplier is going to provide a part that's not quite within spec, and you're going to try to put it into production anyway, and suddenly something's going to break off or there's going to be a problem, your insurance company should be aware of that, and they should be adjusting your premiums accordingly. And when you have the documentation and the history to show them, yeah, we've got this under control and we're monitoring it, then you need to look for savings in that area as well. So those are areas of savings, but there's also improvements and benefits from a top line perspective in terms of you can innovate more effectively with your partners, because you have a trusted, reliable, and effective platform for communicating on a design and collaboration point of view. And you can move into new markets and new geographies more easily because you've got the documentation, you've got the records available in multiple languages, and they can be easily translated automatically to branch out into new areas and to go after new opportunities without having to worry about, okay, how are we going to deal with the regulatory environment in Europe versus Asia versus North America? Suddenly that becomes a lot less of a problem because you have your act together and you've got that digital supply chain quality information ready to go. So there's a couple things that I would say, both on the cost side and the revenue growth side, that hopefully will make some people sit up and take notice next week in Glendale.
No, you brought up a lot of great points, and I think it ultimately comes down to some of the just to briefly summarize. I mean, hey, can you link it to the P&L and balance sheet in some ways, right? Because that's what
right.
the CEOs and CFOs focus on. And then you talked about risk. Well, the failure to the extreme failure of a quality incident is ending up having your company on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So that impacts your reputation, that impacts your brand, shareholder value, and everything else as we've seen. So I think that's the ultimate, extreme case of a quality failure and what that can do to a company. Well, Bill, I mean, we could probably talk for a whole day on all aspects of supply chain quality management, and particularly as it relates to the aerospace and defense industry. But you provided some great insights and advice on this topic. So again, thank you for making the time to be with us today.
It was great. Enjoyed the conversation, and we'll look forward to your next podcast with whoever you find as your next victim. So I look forward to that.
Well, you came out unscathed, so hopefully we'll have you back at some point, and we'd love to touch base. And I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Elemica website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Bill, you can post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for watching, and have a great day, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Bye-bye.